Alrighty, so good morning. Thanks for your patience and your courage coming. We were a very rainy morning. And so we're going to begin with a little meditation. So the subject matter of the course is called Mahamudra. And so we're going to do the meditation that's similar to that. It's not that much different than some meditations you've done before, but the instructions of Mahamudra can sort of enliven that meditation. What we try to do is successively calm the mind more and more. Maybe my preferred method is beginning with using one of the traditional Buddhist meditations of just watching the respiration. Have you done that? I forgot your name.
Jamie.
Jamie. Have you done the breathing meditation?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So just to calm the mind and a little bit, and then instead of focusing on the breathing, to turn your attention to the nature of the mental consciousness. Well, let's say, just to watch your mind. It's like right now, if you were, just what's going on in your mind? Generally, we're so caught up with the senses and being distracted, we're not watching what's happening in our mind. You know, the arisal of, attachment, or the way that one thought comes into our mind and we follow it, and a whole sequence of events happens, like we were talking about ducks, and then Dunkin' Donuts, and then, fried donuts, and there's great fried bread in Afghanistan, how the mind can kind of, by association, keep on going. You want to try to cease that kind of verbalization, inner verbalization, and imagery and so forth. And instead of focusing on that content of the mind, as though the mind is, the mental consciousness is like some space, turning your attention just to the space itself, the space of the mind, which we understand is one of the qualities of its nature. We say the definition, defining characteristic of consciousness is that which is clear and knowing. Very brief, succinct definition of mind. In fact, we find it all in the logical texts, and even in the tantric texts goes along. So mind consciousness, especially all of our consciousnesses, have that same quality. Clear here, we're referring to what we're trying in the Mahamudra to observe, the clear light nature of the mind, unobstructing. Like here in space in front of me, I can deduce that there's no obstruction here by moving my hand. It's not, I don't feel any resistance. There's some wind resistance, but let's say in outer space there's no resistance. That kind of, something similar to that in the mind, that thoughts can emerge from the consciousness without any resistance, and they can dissolve back into the consciousness. Thoughts don't go somewhere else when you're finished with them. That nature of the mind, once experienced, leaves an understanding that we can develop easily. There's no hindrance to developing good thoughts that we've never had before, good qualities in the mind. Even though we might think of ourselves as being, hopeless sometime, we can develop renunciation, we can develop loving kindness, patience, joy, as opposed to jealousy. When someone else gets something we want, we can feel, oh, wonderful, they got that. So what we'll be doing here in a moment is to turn our attention, in one sense, one of the ways you can kind of think of turning your attention away from the content, the object thought, to the subject mind that's understanding them. And when you deprive the thoughts of your attention, I've mentioned this several times, have you begun to notice that? If you don't pay attention to some content of the mind, you might sort of just out of peripheral, like peripheral vision, just noticing that thought begins to fade, or that image, or that emotion, if you don't feed it. another way of saying, besides as though turning your attention away from the thought or trying to see the subject mind as opposed to the object thought, is just within the spaciousness of the mind. Clear on, the thoughts are there, like airplanes flying right in front of you, or drones or whatever, recognizing that the very presence of these thoughts indicates, you can deduce that there has to be spaciousness there. Otherwise they couldn't be there. So just immediately letting go of the thoughts, they begin to dissipate, and you're left with a perception of that clear light nature of the mind. Okay? So let's begin. Let's try that again. We've done this several times. Sit comfortably. Spine erect, eyes partially open. And begin successively going deeper by first watching the breathing, that is to say, with the mind, being mindful of your respiration. When you're skillful in this, you can get rid of the conceptualizing thoughts in as little as 7 respirations, it's said. Just by focusing on this and letting them, focusing on the breathing, letting the thoughts dissipate. Right now, make a mental note of what the breathing is like. So like taking a snapshot in your memory. How, if it's regular, if it's deep, or how noticeable it is. And we'll compare that later with the breathing when we have meditated on a more subtle object, the mind itself. Follow one respiration in as though it were going up your nostrils to the crown of your head, to your throat, to your heart, middle of your heart, chakra, the middle of your chest, near the spine, middle. Leave your attention there, let go of paying attention to the breathing, and just watch your mind. That is to say, one part of the mind being cognizant of the contents of the mind. If there are images arising to your mind, which sometimes happens if you think of someone's face or a scene of some kind, it won't be dependent upon the eye consciousness at this time. It just arises as a mental image within your mental consciousness. So let go, withdraw your attention away from the eye consciousness, like a turtle or tortoise pulling in its head, and successively take your attention away from the ear and nose, tongue, and tactile consciousnesses, like the tortoise pulling in the rest of his limbs or her limbs. Even though you're thinking of a small area in the middle of your chest, having withdrawn your attention away from the senses, still that can have a spacious-like feeling. That is to say, the mind sort of pervading everywhere, mental consciousness. Sometimes you don't have to wait for thoughts to come. There's a deluge of them. At other times when the mind is happy and calm, you might have to wait for a while to notice some content. Although there's always something there, perhaps always the sense of the presence of your body. If there's any discomfort at all in your body, recognize that, like other thoughts, the appearance of that to your mind is something transient. It's not always attended to and dominant. Try to sense the spaciousness of the mind within which that is emerging, that appearance of your body. Defocus on the objective thought or image. Replace your attention instead on the mind, the spaciousness of the mind within which that's arising. Even more subtle than the appearance of the body to the mind is the sense of self-identity, self, me, I. Sometimes as the identifying with that self as though the observer of the mind, that the I is observing the consciousness. Actually, from the insight of the Buddha, there is no real I like that. There is consciousness that's knowing, but there's not a separate observer See if you let go of that sense of I and try to perceive the nature of the consciousness within which that is embedded, from which that is emerged, the clear and knowing nature of the mind. If you get a glimpse of that, try to hold on to it and let go again and again of any thoughts that are coming to see if you can again dwell in that spaciousness without any sense of body or ego, self, just mind, knowing mind. This clarity that we might get a glimpse of, and the attendant understanding that the mind is unobstructing, not viscous like molasses, so that the thoughts sort of have to have some drag as they're coming in. Although sometimes when we're angry or we're very attached, it may seem like the thought is resisting leaving the mind. Actually, they can leave in an instant if we're skillful. So we're trying to observe or know, perceive the clear light nature. So the dual terms of this definition of mind, that which is clear and knowing, we're observing the clarity. That active observation or knowing is the other aspect of mind that has an experience, not something that is inanimate, non-sentient. Understanding that the appearance to our mind of this clarity right now is itself not a direct experience. It itself is like a mental image, like the thoughts and other images in our mind, but based on experience, tending to the factual. So let go of that and try to perceive an even more subtle experience of the clarity of the mind within which that approximation of the clarity was embedded. let go of the sense of an ego or self that's observing this. It is almost like an act of, courageous act, like diving into space. Dive into the spaciousness of your mind. Become one with the consciousness. No dichotomy, no duality of subject and object. Observing this, remind yourself at other times when you're disturbed or unhappy, you don't need to be unhappy. Those are just artifacts within your mind, transient events that, if let go of, will quickly disappear, dissolve back into the clear light nature of the mind. There's no need to feel any inferiority, maybe not having lived up to your own expectations or your parents' expectations of what you do. The clear light nature of the mind is a reservoir from which we can develop all good qualities. And all of the faults of the mind are not part and parcel of the mind. They're not the nature of the mind. Events that emerge from the clear nature, clear light nature of the mind, and absorb back into it. So everything is okay. And then think like this: we're incredibly fortunate to take the time right now to observe this nature of the mind. Maybe we've had glimpses of it over numberless lives in the past, but never pursued the cultivation of this process, watching the fundamental nature of the mind. Not just the contents that always are changing, but the fundamental nature. This has come about right now because of a confluence of conditions. We're born as a human at a time when the Buddhist teachings still exist and are practiced in the world. We have the karma to have encountered them, a group of people who help to preserve the teachings, such as the center and so forth, teachers. Hearing the teachings is so rare, and having the time to pursue them even rarer. To think, I'm going to make use of this opportunity. Sometimes we call it a life of leisure and endowment. Perfect human rebirth. Right now we're not so distracted by being born in incredibly painful, fearful situations like the hell realm, or as animals, as spirits of certain kinds. We have the leisure to practice. the conditions to practice. I think this morning, today, I'm going to use this opportunity to heal myself spiritually. And going beyond that, going beyond just the recognition of that we ourselves need to be healed, that we can get rid of these faults and develop good qualities, to think all other living beings with whom we've had intimate relations of friendship and love and care over numberless lifetimes in the past, although we may not recognize those relations right now, all these beings have been our mother numberless times. They too may be completely oblivious, if we're talking about humans, oblivious of the opportunity they have right now, the juncture of having a human life. Out of compassion for them, identifying, understanding our equality with them, our similarity to them, moved by that, thinking I'm going to listen to the teachings this morning on the Mahamudra, the great seal of reality. Not simply to accumulate intellectual knowledge, but to have some experience of the nature of the mind so that I can develop good qualities, eliminate my faults, so that I can actually benefit other beings perfectly and not harm them at all. I'm going to listen to the teachings this morning, take this Dharma action of paying attention to the Dharma teachings in order to become enlightened for the sake of all sentient beings. Giving up all other aims, at least momentarily, for worldly gratification during this life, success, wealth, fame. This is my goal, like going on a long, long journey, independent of the individual events that take place on the journey, always keeping in mind the end point. I'm going to enlightenment. That's my goal. And to get there, I'm going to listen to the teachings, analyze them, pay attention, try to experience them in meditation. And then bring your attention slowly back to the present. Colors and shapes, objects of touch appearing to the mind again, the varieties of conventional phenomena. Any observations, comments?
Just a challenge that when you're not...
You're challenging. That's good. No, that's good. Yeah, that's good. I thought that...
When you're just having an image coming from your mental consciousness, sometimes it's difficult to see that as the appearance and to separate that from the consciousness that's perceiving that appearance. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Say that. What was the thing? When something.
When you're just like having a mental image.
Okay. Mental image. That is an appearance.
That is an appearance, but sometimes it's hard for me to be able to separate that and stand back and see perceive the perception.
Right. So it's not as though. So that already presupposes there's someone who's stepping back as though there's an object and a subject, and you, the observer, is going back to look at the subject. So here, let go of that. Just for when you practice at home, when you have time to do this again and again, repeatedly. Like in the Heart Sutra, remember at the very first, when Avalokiteshvara tells Shariputra, his first thing, those who wish to train in the Bodhisattva's practice of the perfection of wisdom, practice like this, correctly and repeatedly, observing the five aggregates as empty of inherent existence also. The five aggregates also as empty of inherent existence. So repeatedly. So when you do meditation, one of the essential points of it is to be able to do it repeatedly and continually, to keep that going. So you begin to get an experience of this, and it's good to ask questions like this now when we're trying to clear up doubts. It's always important to try to clear up doubts, because otherwise you may spend a long time repeatedly doing something that's not going to bring you to some successful endpoint. So just let go, first of all, just like the person who's sitting in a cafe or cafeteria, just sitting there and sensing all the things around you, people moving, the snippets of conversation you might hear, trucks going by in the street. Just notice that there's content within the mind, the mental consciousness, again and again, repeatedly, reminding yourself to take your attention away from the senses. So withdraw. So it's not the eyes, not the ears, not what is apprehended by the ear consciousness, not by the nose, tongue, or tactile consciousness. But coming down here, you're in this very quiet state, watching the content of the mind. Then there may be moments as you're quiet like this that your mind begins to engage in some of those thoughts. It's like you pay attention to the other table over there. That, oh, that guy is smoking a cigar, or this lady has ordered espresso, and you start to, associations come. So recognizing the nature of the thoughts within the mind, bring your attention, use your mind in such a way to remind yourself, I don't have to follow those thoughts. In fact, I'm not going to follow those thoughts. Their presence in my mind has come about sometimes because of karmic imprints or associations of the previous moments of thought, various reasons why the thoughts or images, verbalization might be in your mind. But if I don't follow them, unlike the cafe, where if you don't pay attention to a person and you look later, they're still there. Unlike that, if you don't pay attention to this thought in the mind, the cafeteria or cafe of your mind, it will begin to fade away. It may be something that you've thought about again and again, like your own faults or your own good qualities or your own goals. So there's something coming again, something that you desire very much, friendships or whatever. So that the intensity, there's two things, the intensity and the frequency of how often these thoughts come, the interrupting thoughts, the content of the mind. So as you begin to take your attention away from them and focus just on the ambience, just the sort of like the space within which all of this is taking place. There might also, in the cafe, there might be smoke or wafting, so people are smoking cigarettes or something like that. So there's something within the, but you could sense that's not part of the space around here. That's just a transient event. There might be many kinds of thoughts, some that are very subtle, some that are more gross. So just being patient when we do, here we're just a very short time. What was it, like 5-10 minutes? So to do again and again. When you do this kind of meditation, Mahamudra, you might want to set aside half an hour, 45 minutes for a session, maybe later, longer, a couple of times a day, 2, 3, 4 times a day. And during that session, have no expectations you're immediately going to see things. You're just getting to know the mind at first. Be patient, be kind to yourself. And even break up that 45-minute session into short intervals when you're really there, you're not tired, your mind is not fatigued. And then, relax for a moment, have a sip of whatever you hydrate with. I've got Mediglio d'Oro. You know Mediglio d'Oro? Italian coffee, espresso. My friends bought to humor me. They said, "What kind of coffee do you like?" I said, Mediglio d'Oro. So I'm hydrated with Mediglio d'Oro. Gold medallion. And then again, go back to the mind. In time, the little 5-minute segments where you're able to hold your attention can start to get a little bit longer. You can keep your attention without fatigue. So the content, to recognize there is the content of the mind. That's the obvious thing, because the mind itself, the clear light nature, is not something that's obvious at first. Because it's transparent, right? It's, so to speak, it's clear. What's obvious at first is the content. Like the example I've given before. We go to an aquarium. Is there an aquarium in Washington, D.C.?
Baltimore, there's one, I know.
There's one in Baltimore? Is there one in D.C., Jeff?
There's one in the Commerce Department, at least there used to be. I don't know if they're still there.
In the Commerce Department?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anna, do you know? Is there one? Yeah, I thought you might have. So anyway, you may have been to an aquarium before or seen pictures. Big wall of glass behind which is water, and there's fish within that. Maybe they have some plants growing or other things. Like that, if we were there, say Eric and I have gone to the aquarium and Eric says, "Look at the clarity of the water." And I said, "What do you mean? All I see are the fish." Because of its very nature, you're not focusing on the clarity of the water, right? And you see, and he hits me and come on, how could the fish be there if there wasn't that clear water there? How could they be swimming? They're swimming in the spaciousness of this water. So like that, you still have a sense of observer at first, that's different, a dichotomy, a duality between the observer's self and what you're observing. It's almost as though there's a self, there's the clarity of the mind, the subject mind, and the objects, the contents. When you can see the contents within the mind, as though they're both present, then let go of your focusing on the objects, the objective objects, the content of the mind. Just sort of step back and just try to sense that ambience of the mind, the clarity of the mind within which they're arising. So there are various techniques, as are mentioned in this text, to do that. And we've touched on them just experientially, just in our simple meditation. One method is just to sort of suggest to yourself when some thought seems to be so prominent, what is the consciousness that's perceiving it in terms of these two parts of the definition of mind, clear and knowing? What is the consciousness that is knowing that? It's almost like turning your attention away, turning your back to someone who's right in your face, so they're not irritating you any longer, and they sort of disappear. So that depends on sort of looking at the knower, which is one of the parts of the mind. Usually we say that which is clear and knowing, definition of mind. Clarity is its nature, its conventional nature. I'm not talking about ultimate nature. Knowing is its function. Many definitions, like the definition of heat, will say that which is hot and burning. So hotness or heat is the nature of fire. When you talk about the four elements, what is the nature of fire? That which is hot and burning. So hot is its conventional nature, general characteristic, very specific characteristic. Burning is its function. So there's something similar here in the definition of mind, that which is clear and knowing. Clarity is its conventional nature. Knowing is its function. So here we're using its function to let go of obsessing with the objective thought. Otherwise, even when it's there, to use, rather than focusing on the knowing, focusing on the clarity of the mind. The fact that that thought is there means there has to be spaciousness of the mind there. The example I've given several times, but I'm so embarrassed. There was one boy here the other day who I had to ask his name, I think 5 times. His name was Scott at the end. I can remember Scott Towles or something. I forgot your name. Jamie Lee Curtis. I need some pneumatic device to remember. I remember Scott Towles. Jamie, example you didn't hear, I think most of the others heard. For instance, when we talk about ordinary space, we don't perceive space with our eyes. This is what we think we see. Oh, there's space between me and Venerable and the room there. That's not the actual meaning of space. Space is an intellectual construct. It's the mere absence of obstructing contact. You can come to understand that there is a lack of obstructing contact by doing some experiments. And the example I've given sometime is where there is, let's say, a stone or some solid object, you can say, is there any space there? Maybe, you say, oh no, there's no space here because I'm obstructed. No, there's still space here, otherwise the rock, the boulder, or the object couldn't be there. Understanding that, you can let go of your obsession with the content, with the rock, and focus on the nature of the mind within which it's appearing. So rather than looking at the function of the mind to pay less attention to the object, you can, even when the object is right there, just focus on the spaciousness of the mind within which it's arising. And if you can just flicker to that, just let go of that object, it can begin, as you're not feeding it with attention, it can begin to disappear. And then as we did successively, to notice that there might still be a sense of the body, let go of that. That's just appearing to your mind as a thought, as an appearance to your mind. Let go of the sense of the ego or the self, who seems to be a third party here. So there's the content, so say the mind itself, the clarity of the mind that knows, the content that comes and goes within that, clouds, birds, whatever. And then there seems like there's a third element, the self, who's observing both of those things. From Buddhist perception, there's no other self like that. So this is helping with our eventual understanding of selflessness, although this is not, letting go of that self is not a meditation on the selflessness of persons or the emptiness of the self. So just to be patient, to do this again and again, and think of these various topics that have been mentioned during our meditation, and try to duplicate that in meditation. See if you can remain concentrated on that clear light nature. As I said in synopsis of this practice of the Mahamudra, this is the great methods of the great Mahasiddhas, the great tantric yogis and yoginis of the past, to realize emptiness. First, one tries to recognize the clear light nature of the mind, identify it, which we don't usually. We're all up here. Usually we're looking at the content, and we're thinking about the content. And we're oblivious of the fact that the thoughts are coming into our mind, and we don't have to follow them. Something comes to your mind, you blurt it out. There was one Tibetan geshe who went to Rome in the early days of the spreading of Buddhism. He had been hired by Ismao, the Italian research institute, to be the librarian of their Tibetan text collection. Geshe Sengi, I can't remember his first name. So at first when he came there, and he was teaching the Italians, he used to say, "Oh, I like the Italians very much, because they, unlike the Tibetans and others, they just speak their mind, you know. They're just really, what do we say, frank or something like that, you know." When he'd been there for some time, he sort of changed his opinion. He said, "You know, this is not actually a good, you know, just speak whatever's in your mind." Like we have some people that just, you know, they can't help it but blurt out whatever they're thinking, you know. So he had a different opinion. And sometimes it's just like with relationships. Sometimes you're very enamored with someone, you know, some person you find attractive for some reason, but after some time being with them, those very things that you thought were attractive, you actually see as unattractive, as false. So learning not to just follow every thought that comes to your mind is like, you know, just being, we are under the influence right now of the thoughts that come to our mind. It's like in India, have you ever seen the big water buffaloes? Big black water buffaloes? Maybe, do we have them in the States, that kind of thing? You know the ones I'm talking about? Or in Asia and Thailand and stuff? Anna, did you ever see water buffaloes? Were you born in the States, or were you born in China? Or
In Taiwan.
in Taiwan?
Yeah.
Did you ever see water buffaloes?
Occasionally.
Occasionally, big horse. So sometimes you can see a little child leading the buffalo with a string through the buffalo's nose, you know. So we're like that. These thoughts are like the little child that's leading our ego around. We're buffeted by the thoughts. We follow them unknowingly, under the control of anger, our anger that arises within the mind. Is anger a thought? It's a conceptual state of mind. You say it's one of the varieties of things that are appearing to the mind, sort of coloring the whole mind, right? Sort of something causing irritation, attachment. All of these things arise within our mind and we follow them. But we don't have to follow them. So this kind of observation is very useful. Yes, sir?
I've always found that, I mean, the thoughts just come, right? They're just myriads of thoughts that come. But some of the thoughts are seductive. They're thoughts that you want to follow.
Yes.
Right? You want to follow that thought because it's something new, or it's something that piques an interest.
Yeah.
And I know it's the same issue is you don't have to do that. I've always felt that I wanted to do that. And in the
Yes.
context of those meditations, I want to follow this thought.
Yes.
In the meditation we just did,
Yeah.
I had a thought that came up, a memory of of a time in California 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and it just sort of started to
Yeah.
flesh itself out, and it was a pleasant memory
Yeah.
of the time,
Right.
and I didn't want to let it go. I wanted
Right.
to follow it.
I wonder if does those kind of comments show up on the microphone? Do I have to repeat it so that can hear through the mic? Did you guys hear that? So this is a good point. So I mentioned before when we talked about first when you get a glimpse of the clarity, you want to try to develop a elongation of that period, a concentration on that. And the two main faults that prevent you from, two main obstacles that prevent you from keeping that in mind, one of them is sinking. That is, the mind loses its clarity, just like, almost, not like sleeping, but just like you got a glimpse, but you're not holding it carefully, like that elusive TV controller you're holding 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and while they're selling ladies' jewelry on the what are those programs in the middle of the night. You can buy things. I've never understood why someone would watch those things. But anyway, you've lost.
But there you were.
channel surfing, trying to get away from those channels. But then so sinking is one of the faults. The other fault is what we call excitement, and it centers right on what you're saying. One of the things, you're focusing on the clarity of the mind, but then the face of some person or some thought, some memory of some pleasant moment, or the anticipation where you think, oh, that could be, I could have that friendship, or that's embracing this person, or I could become famous, I could be loved, and you're sort of playing out some fantasy in the mind that's pleasant. So that's what's happening there is when we differentiate the various things that can take you off the object you're trying to concentrate on, let's say the clarity of the mind. Sometimes they're unpleasant ones, that easy to get back onto the object because they're not pleasant. When you get scattered or distracted to something that's pleasant, that particular variety of scattering or distraction is called excitement. That's the main obstacle to continuing. At first, sinking is a big obstacle. That is, you don't hold the object tightly enough, and its subtle varieties have to be overcome later. But excitement is the one that continues longer. So we have to remind ourselves, we have to train in the Lam Rim, the stages of the path, reminding ourselves that all of these things within cyclic existence are not, all of them are the nature of suffering. None of them are real happiness. Even if I had that, even if I could be back there, I'm in the surf with friends, my body is more supple, and had more hair and less weight or whatever, great times. I had some, respect and whatever, you're thinking, oh, those are great times. There was no happiness there. You weren't really satisfied then. I mean, it was some superficial buzz. The important thing to remember again and again about samsaric happiness. Samsaric happiness is what the Buddha called afflicted happiness. It's not, it is, usually we think there are 3 kinds of feelings, right? Pleasant, neutral, and unpleasant feelings, right? And by feelings I mean actual experience of pleasure, pain, or indifference. I don't mean like I have feelings for you, or emotions. I'm using the word very specifically. Let's talk about the usual sense of feeling of happiness, which draws you into continuing those fantasies. Give up that clear light. I want to be on the beach, I'm in California in the sun, and those feelings of pleasure from the Buddhist understanding are suffering, the nature of suffering. You say, well, George, excuse me, you just said that they were pleasant feelings. Pleasure and suffering are different. Come on, get a grip on it. What are you saying? So you have to remember, and that's why it is a prelude to doing Mahamudra. You have to be trained in the general path. The 3 levels of suffering. Do you remember?
Pervasive.
Pardon?
Pervasive suffering.
Well, let's go from gross to subtle. What's the grossest kind of suffering? Do you know, Eric? Have you heard this terminology before?
Yeah, is it just the suffering of suffering, just like thing I didn't like happened?
Right.
Yeah.
Obvious sufferings. In Sanskrit, you say dukkha, dukkha, suffering of suffering. Or some people don't like to translate dukkha as suffering. Want to translate it as unsatisfactory. The unsatisfactoriness of unsatisfactoriness. Or the suffering of unsatisfactoriness. Not to put a fine point on it, suffering of suffering. That means obvious to anyone. Animals, amoebas, anyone, or I'm not sure if amoebas have minds, whatever has mind, there are things that are obviously uncomfortable. Then there's what's called changeable suffering. And that refers to afflicted happiness, samsaric happiness. What we remember back in California and the sun, and or that we might anticipate in the future, some kind of pleasant kind of thing. Why is that still called? It's happiness in one sense, because to the deluded mind, we call that pleasure, but it's actually the nature of suffering. Why is that? Let's say when you're hot, you're out in the sun and you've been working, you're digging ditches, or you're working in your yard, and you think, oh, how nice it would be in the night to be in the nice, cool shade. Have some nice, cool drink, some iced tea or something. So you go sit in the shade for a while. The suffering of heat, so when you sit there, you might say, ah, boy, this is great. This is nice. Ah. What's happening is the suffering of heat is going down. The suffering of being in the shade, the cool, is going up. But because there's such a big difference between them, the greater suffering is still going down. That's experienced as pleasure. Actually, it's relief, essentially. There's no real pleasure there at all, the Buddha said. That could be like what was Felicity's mind blow. That can be very, very powerful understanding that you can draw back from your Lanrim, the reservoir of understanding from Lanrim and experience in the meditative session. Remind yourself, not only have I had those experiences numberless times in past lives, many, many times this lifetime, and they never really lasted. They always change. So you could call it changeable suffering in that way. But even when I had them, they weren't real happiness. It was just alleviating one suffering, replacing it with another. You wait enough in the shade, maybe it takes a while. When the suffering of cool exceeds the suffering of heat, you start to say, oh, let's go sit in the nice warm sun. Same thing happens. You sit out in the sun and, oh, wow, nice. Goes back and forth, And I think you've heard me give this example of Richard Gere. At an earlier time, Richard Gere is, I'm not sure, I think a couple of years older than Richard Gere. He's in maybe his early 70s or late 60s. Still attractive, but maybe 20 years ago, he's more of a heartthrob, right? So if I would mention in a class, imagine embracing Richard Gere. It would always be some people, I'd always hear from the back, Anna, do you know who Richard Gere is? You do, okay. But you're completely, you're more of a yogini. You're just, Richard Gere, nothing. Okay. That happened in Tokyo one time, I remember very clearly from the back. But imagine, sitting with Richard Gere. At first you think, could be nothing better. But then after some time, a couple hours, it's a body odor, there's smell from the mouth, and your body is aching. There's no longer experience of pleasure. It's changed into pain. From the very moment that you embraced Richard Gere, the imprint of longing, first of all, as you come close, the longing in your mind, almost is like an irritation, that has begun to go down, and the suffering of being with Richard Gere has begun to go up. I mentioned to Richard, and probably many of you have met him at one time or another, you mentioned him this to him, and he's quite okay with using him as an example, I think. So, just replacing one suffering with another, that's what's called changeable suffering. So to remind yourself of that, when you're tempted to leave the Dharma object that you've chosen, let's say the clear light nature of the mind, you think, oh no, I can look at that anytime. Here's the beach in California, here's the sun, here's the, things like that. Remind yourself that's never brought you real happiness. Even if you had that now, you wouldn't really be happy. You've had it numberless times before. It's actually the nature of suffering. Okay, and I don't know if that gives you some ammunition. You might still be harboring that, but let alone what George says. I still want to follow that.
No, I know that the theory is
is
in fact seductive, and in fact the mind at that point, or my mind often says, well, this, you shouldn't be following this thought. You need to get back to the object, and I'll get right back to it. But I need to just flesh this out a little bit. It's just that.
Right. So
that game.
Right. So that is the demarcation between, in this lifetime, being able to practice the Dharma or putting it off into the future. Say before your meditation session, you say, man, all this life I've put off the practice of Dharma. I've gotten into it a little bit, but always on the periphery. Put it off to the future. It's a form of laziness, right? Procrastination. We mean well, as Lama Yeshe used to say, they means well, dear. Remember Lama's language. But we don't have yet the strength of mind. We've got to be more disciplined. And remind yourself before the session, I can think about these things anytime. I can daydream later. In fact, I'll put a time after the meditation session. Well, I'll think of that, I'll leave it, I just let myself go then. But this time, I'm going to try to focus on the clarity of the mind.
I once did a retreat where...
You once did a retreat? Good.
I spent a couple of hours cataloging everyone I had ever known, for no apparent reason.
In the meditative session.
Yeah, it started to come, and it sort of continued in an obsessive way.
Yeah.
For a while.
Yeah.
Absolutely no reason.
I understand. So, just to finish up, 3 kinds of suffering. Suffering of suffering, changeable suffering, and then the third kind of suffering Venerable mentioned at the beginning.
Pervasive.
All pervasive, compounded suffering. What it means is, Even when you're, so suffering of suffering is associated with suffering feelings. Changeable suffering is associated with contaminated happiness, happy feelings. It's actually not real happiness, it's of the nature of suffering. All pervasive compounded suffering is associated with neutral feelings. Even right now, if I ask you, Rebecca, is it Rebecca, right? Your left earlobe, what is the feeling of your left earlobe right now? Is it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? Neutral, probably. Yeah. Maybe someone has some other feeling there when you say, "Oh, actually, it's hurting." That earlobe is susceptible to feeling pain or happiness, or let's say happy, pleasant feeling there or unpleasant feeling there. But right now it's neutral. Simply having a continuation of the contaminated aggregates, our body and mind, that are susceptible to karma and to the arisal of more delusions, that is what's called all-pervasive compounded suffering. You might say, it's not suffering, it's just sort of like neutral, it's just there. Yeah, but within that, suffering can arise at any moment. Jeff's getting lots of likes on his Facebook account there. So, let me continue in the text.
I have a question.
Yes.
So the suffering of change, you say suffering of change. So is that the impermanent nature of the human life is impermanent? Everybody faces death. Just like a baby, a birth of baby, then start facing the cycle of death.
Right.
So
To translate it that way, to translate it as suffering of, what did you say, suffering of change?
yeah, is that
That's-
impermanent nature of
Yeah, I
human
understand,
life?
but I say to translate it that way doesn't necessarily get to the gist. It's changeable suffering. You might say it's the same thing. It's not saying that change itself is suffering, although there's truth to that. It's saying that most presentations of changeable suffering tend toward what you're saying. It's sort of like the pleasant feeling that you have will not be there continuously. It will eventually change into suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Like an example of embracing Richard Gere. Okay? But the real deeper meaning of that is that even when the pleasant feeling is there, not waiting until it eventually, like, oh, it's, okay, it may change into suffering later, but man, it's really great now, right? Like, as though there's a moment when it's real happiness and then it eventually changes into suffering. That's how many people understand that changeable suffering to mean. That's not the actual meaning. Aryadeva, who was a disciple of Nagarjuna. Have you heard of Aryadeva? No, Aryadeva, who was his kind of student and companion, and wrote texts on Madhyamika philosophy, also Buddha, the emptiness and so forth. In his text called the Yogic Deeds of Bodhisattvas, the 400 stanzas is sometimes called also. There's a very good translation of that in English. I think the second or third chapter of that, there's 400 stanzas, so there's very many chapters. Second or third chapter, I think, is considered to be the clearest, very clear exposition about changeable suffering. So if you can get that book, read that. The point is this. Say someone has a particular illness, like a heart disease, that the remedy to alleviate certain symptoms is to take nitroglycerin pill, or even, let's say, cyanide or something in very minute doses. So the ingestion of that cyanide or some other usual poison helps to alleviate some greater symptom and one feels some relief. But giving that example, even from the very moment you're taking the poison, it's not real happiness. It's at that very moment that you feel relief, that you call happiness or pleasure. It's not real pleasure, it's just really exchanging one suffering with another. Heroin addict, we see, someone, we feel, a friend of ours, they're about to shoot up with heroin, and we're trying to say, that's not real happiness. For them, whatever irritation, mental, that they anticipate being reduced by the taking of that heroin, from that very moment, they feel, first they inject it, Have you ever been with someone that injected? When I was in Philadelphia, there were people that I had known that were drug addicts, and they would inject. And for that moment, they're feeling what they think is great ecstasy, great pleasure, because some incredible reduction of irritation, like taking what do you call it, pain relievers, but in this extreme form. It's not real happiness. If we can tell them, that's not real happiness. After some time, when the irritation has gone down and the suffering of having the heroin in your body is there, what is that called afterwards? There's some name for that state, they're just, they're looking for their next injection, their next fix. So like that, that's the meaning of, the subtle meaning of changeable suffering. It's not that it's happy now and it will eventually change into suffering. That's true too, but that's not the profound meaning. At the very moment that you're experiencing this samsaric happiness or pleasure, it's contaminated happiness. It's not real, uncontaminated happiness like the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas experience, having realized emptiness and not having attachment to that. That happiness, what we call happiness, is actually the nature of suffering. There's no happiness there. Where's the happiness? This is one suffering going down, exchanging it with another suffering. Okay? That's very, very useful to know. Like say, what should I say? Oh, Jamie. Okay, I was just trying to put my mnemonic. Jamie. So Jamie's holding a cocktail party, and Jeff has mentioned he's invited. Eric's invited. Anna, Rebecca, Venerable, Mike, and Venerable have all been invited. I haven't been invited, and I'm sitting at home and feeling miserable. Just to think, even if I was there, I wouldn't really be happy. To use your Dharma knowledge, remember we said Dharma, the holy Dharma is that which protects you from suffering. Real Dharma is the Dharma realizations. Just to have that little nugget, even if I had that experience, I wouldn't really be happy. Because it would be changeable suffering. Maybe some of my, some of my anxiety would be reduced by being with the people, hearing, people, seeing nice people. But the suffering of being there, just to be amongst those people all the time, at a certain point you say, please, let me go in the other room. I'm going to lock myself in this little closet so I have some quiet peace of mind. Okay. Thanks for the question. Okay. So, on page 2, we were reading on the big paragraph in the middle in the translation. As for the actual basic methods, as we already talked about the preliminaries of purifying negativity and accumulating merit, and especially the practice of guru devotion, meditating and unifying your mind with the guru. As for the actual basic methods, although there are many ways of asserting Mahamudra, there are two when divided according to sutras and tantras. So that means the sutric Mahamudra, which we're basically dealing with here, and then the tantric Mahamudra, which deals with the subtlemost mind. The latter, the tantric Mahamudra, is a greatly blissful, clear light mind manifested by such skillful means as penetrating the vital points of the subtle Vajra body and so forth. We mentioned that's about it as far as we go yesterday, just this next sentence also. The Mahamudra of the traditions of Saraha, Nargajuna, Naropa, and Maitripa, it is the quintessence of the Anuttara Yoga class of Tantra as taught in the 7 texts of the Mahasiddhas and the 3 core volumes. I think those are 2 sets of texts that are attributed to Saraha, I may be wrong, maybe even before him. So of these, mainly talking about this methodology that we're talking about here, Mahamudra, turning your attention into the clear light nature of the mind and trying to use it to develop concentration and eventually realize emptiness. The former, that means the Sutra Mahamudra, refers to the ways of meditating on voidness as directly indicated in the expanded, intermediate, and brief Prajnaparamita Sutras, the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. So we sometimes call them the 3 mothers. I often think some of these Buddhist names make great names for rock and roll bands. When I was in college and studying physics, there was something called the anomalous Zeeman effect. I thought, man, I gotta start a band called the anomalous Zeeman effect. So what are the 3 mothers? The 3 mothers are these 3 presentations of the Prajnaparamita Sutras. Some of them were, there's one occasion where the Buddha gave extended explanation of the perfection of wisdom. And the most elaborate exposition of that written down or memorized was called the expanded or extensive Prajnaparamita Sutra in 20,000 verses, or 100,000 verses. And then the intermediate was something like 25,000 verses. The brief was 8,000 verses. Still sounds a lot of verses, right? They were presentations of the Prajnaparamita that were memorized and recited by people later. Sometimes people of very sharp intellect remembered everything that was said. Also among the people for which the extended or extensive Prajnaparamita, the longest one. Sometimes they were people of dull faculties because they needed to hear everything repeated again and again and again and again. Intermediate, 25,000. The 8,000 verse has the same essence as the 100,000 verse, but a lot of things left out. It's like, rather than saying, oh, one meditates on the 108 objects. Instead of saying all 108, you just say the first couple and then up to and including omniscient mind, you know. Does that make sense? Rather than saying, at the class there was Anila, Mike, Rebecca, going through everyone. You just say, from Mike to Venerable Dundrup, I got a class. Just this is a brief. So actually the brief, some people think it was suitable for people of lesser intellect because there's less words and you can kind of see the forest for the trees, but also those of the sharpest intellect, that was appropriate text for them because they didn't need all those other, detailed explanations or the names of all these things. So the Sutra Mahamudra refers to the ways of meditating on voidness as directly indicated in the extensive, intermediate, and brief Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. The supremely realized Arya Nargajuna, remember what Arya means? It means he's someone who's realized emptiness directly, superior being. Arya Nargajuna said, Except for this, there is no other pathway of mind leading to liberation. Except for this. What does that mean? What do you need to achieve liberation? Simply renunciation? Is that enough? You know, very firm discipline. No, you need to realize the ultimate nature of phenomena. You need to realize emptiness, selflessness. Jamie, do those words sound familiar to you? Have you heard okay. Here I shall give, this is the Panchen Lama saying, here I shall give relevant instruction on Mahamudra in accord with these intentions of his, that means Nagarjuna's, and discuss the methods that lead you to know the mind face to face in keeping with the exposition of the lineage masters. The lineage here refers to the lineage of Mahamudra that the Panchen Lama received from his guru, Dharmavajra, who he mentioned previously, back to Tsongkhapa. Tsongkhapa had received the long lineage from the time of the Mahasiddhas, but also had a special short lineage he'd heard directly, received in meditation, direct instruction from Manjushri, the Buddha of wisdom. From the point of view of individually ascribed names, there are numerous traditions, such as those of the simultaneously arising as merged, the amulet box, possessing 5, the 6 spheres of equal taste, the 4 syllables, the pacifier, the object to be cut off, ch, like we do the ch meditation, dzogchen, the great completion, the discursive Majjhimika view, and so on. So what he's saying is that at this time, there were many special methods to bring about a meditative experience of emptiness. Like nowadays, when we hear in the world, often we hear Majjhimika, you know, the practice of Nagarjuna, and so forth. But we also hear Dzogchen. Have you heard of Dzogchen? Mike, have you heard of Dzogchen? Yeah, probably most. Anyone has never heard that term before? You haven't heard, so Jamie. Dzogchen is Tibetan words, the great completion. Dzogpa means to complete. Chempo, Chen means great, the great completion. So it's actually referring to a direct experience of emptiness, but particularly when you talk about Dzogchen, it's talking about certain meditative methods that are used and have been preserved very much in the Nyingma tradition. There's 4 Tibetan traditions, Buddhist traditions, and Nyingma, particularly, they cherish those things. Not so much different than Mahamudra, but still having some significant differences. Some people get enamored. Oh, you came Mahamudra teaching. You're studying I'm studying Dzogchen. You know, you might feel, or I'm studying Mahamudra. I'm not studying just this. People might have allegiances and attachments to these various methods, but the point that the Panchen Lama is making here is that all of these various methods, including Che, the cutting off of the ego and so forth, all of them get down to the same point. A little bit different pathways to get to it, but they're all talking about developing a meditative state and then experiencing the reality of emptiness within that state, rather than, as we said before. Nevertheless, when scrutinized by a yogi or yogini, learned in scripture and logic, and experienced in meditation, their definitive meanings are all seem to come to the same intended point. All of these different things. So here we're going to leave off the other names. We're just going to focus on the Mahamudra. Also, for this sutra tradition of Mahamudra, which we're not talking about the tantric version yet, but this is the perfect preparation to practice tantric Mahamudra. Out of the 2 methods, namely seeking a meditative state on top of having gained a correct view of voidness, of emptiness, and the other method, seeking a correct view on top of a meditative state, I shall explain here in accordance with the latter method. Remember, I brought that out at the very first lecture. So the special thing about Mahamudra and Dzogchen and some of the other things is that from the very beginning you're spending your time not in so much time of study and intellectual setting up the meaning of emptiness, as we did last weekend in the Heart Sutra, but one tries to have some kind of taste of spaciousness, which is an analog of emptiness. Not emptiness at all, but beginning to just calm the mind within which you can do this analysis of emptiness later. So that's the method that we're doing here. On a seat, meditative cushion, conducive for mental stability. What kind of seat is that? Conducive for mental stability. Filled with a certain kind of grain you can buy on the web or what? Well, it means one that's comfortable and one that's slightly elevated in the back so that you can sit cross-legged without putting some tension on the muscles of your back. You can sit. You might think, oh, that's just a crutch, they have that little cushion underneath your spine. Have you ever thought that? Maybe you thought, the real yogis, they just sit completely flat. But even the great yogis always have a little elevation in the back of their cushion. So on a cushion seat, conducive for mental stability, assume the sevenfold bodily posture and clear yourself purely with a round of the 9 tastes of breath. Let me read this other translation, because Alex sometimes interesting. So in this book, if you happen to have Lama Yeshe's book, the translation by Vola of the root text is I'm on page 121 here. Between the two approaches, seeking meditation on calm abiding on the basis of the view, and seeking the view on the basis of meditation and calm abiding, the explanation here follows the second approach. On a seat suitable for absorption, meditative concentration, adopting the 7 crucial elements of physical posture, cleanse the channels with the 9-round breathing. At the beginning, with lucid awareness, thoroughly release all impurities, and with a pure, virtuous mind, go for refuge and generate bodhicitta. So, what does it mean, sometimes it's called the 7-point posture of meditation. What is that referring to? What is that also called? The 7 crucial points of what? There's one particular Buddha that's associated with that. Vairochana. Why is that? Of the various 5 Buddha families. You've heard of the 5 Buddha families? What are they? The Columbos? No.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of Jamie in New York City. The 5 Buddha families. Vairochana, Amitabha, Aksholya, Ratnasambhava, Amoghasiddha. So those sometimes are associated with the 5 aggregates, and Vairochana is associated with the body aggregate, the form aggregate. So in the pictorial representations of the 5 Buddha families, Vairochana is the one sitting in that meditative posture. The Vajra Asana, I'm not actually in Vajrasana, but my legs are crossed. Vajra Asana is when you actually, what do people in the West call full lotus. Sitting in the full lotus. Actually, it's not the lotus posture at all. The lotus posture is the posture that if one of these male deities is embracing the female deity, that particular posture with the legs around the body is called the lotus posture. So it's not the full lotus or the half lotus. This is actually called the Vajra Asana, the immutable position of the legs. Asana means kind of posture. So there's 7 factors to sit. We'd alluded to them a little bit with the spine erect, the legs crossed, the hands joined, the thumbs joined together, the hands on the lap, the head slightly bent forward, the eyes partially closed, the tongue on the top of the palate to keep saliva from, filling up your mouth and dribbling out. These are among the 7 postures. Sometimes they say the 8 postures. If they say the 8 postures, what does that mean? What's the 8th one? Do you know, Anna? You seem to be remembering. No? Rebecca? No? Jeff? So sometimes it's the one that's mentioned next here, the 9-round breathing. Alex translates it as here as clear yourself purely with a round of the 9 tastes of breath. Maybe makes it sound obscure. Here, Vola translates it, on a seat suitable for absorption, adopting the 7 crucial elements of physical posture, cleanse with the 9-round breathing. She puts in parentheses, cleanse the channels with the 9-round breathing. There's no mention of the word taste there. So what this means is, and we haven't done this yet, but we will today or later. Remember, we have begun doing, I said successively, we can start watching the breathing. We just watch the breathing in and out, right? I mentioned in one of the earlier meditations, if you felt some tension in your body, when you breathe out, you can imagine breathing out that tension. Do you recall that? So this is alluding to this, what's so-called 9-round meditation. What it is actually called expelling the defiled prana. You know the word prana? What is prana?
Subtle energy?
Yeah, what's the Tibetan word? You know very well. Lung. Lung. People say, oh, Lama, I've got lung. Lama Yeshe used to say, very good, dear. Without lung, you'd be dead. Without it. There's an extensive kind of, if you concentrate too much inside, and you haven't skill in meditation, you can kind of get like, not heartburn, but kind of like a long-lasting tension in the heart area. Not the beating heart, but like the heart chakra. Because the airs have been congregated there, but they haven't flowed into the central channel and so forth. So there are various, all of our mental states, all mind is like the rider of a horse. I may have given this example before. It is like a rider who has been super glued to a horse. The mind and its vehicle, the wind, the prana upon which provides the ability for that mind to move to various objects. Mind and its associated wind are inseparable. They're like the 2 truths. Remember we said conventional truth and ultimate truth? They're not separate, they're not different. They're one entity, but conceptually different, right? You remember that, Mike? Jeff? The same thing happens here with form, the wind, prana, which is a manifestation of form, and the consciousness, which is its rider, so to speak, which is formless. Often we say, we emphasize, mind, consciousness is formless. It doesn't have a continuity, a continuum that can be created from form. You can't take matter, like Einstein discovered. You can take physical matter and convert it into energy, and energy can be converted back into mass and so forth. Consciousness is of a different continuum. You can't create consciousness out of matter, out of ordinary material energy. Did you know that? So then when one's told later, when you hear about Tantra and the explanation of the mind, that it's a little bit confusing because consciousness, which is formless, forms one entity with its mounted wind, the wind upon which it's mounted, I should say, which is material, which is form. So you do have one thing which is both form and formless, but when you just consider consciousness itself, that part of it can't be created by form. Okay? So within our body, because of the various thoughts that we have, there's certain mounted winds, let's say of the angered thoughts, the distracted thoughts, thinking of California and the sun or whatever. Those winds are called defiled winds because they act as mounts of those thoughts, and they may perpetuate those thoughts for some time while those winds are still present in the body, that prana, that lung. It doesn't mean all wind. It doesn't mean the wind that you breathe in when you, or the air element that you breathe in when you have respiration and expiration. Although there is a relationship between that gross wind and the subtle winds. That's why breathing meditation is very good to calm the mind. So what we do at the beginning in this, here utilizing this very special method, is called the 9-round breathing. If you used more words to explain it, you could say the 9 rounds of breathing to expel the defiled winds. Or, parenthetically, how did Vola add this somewhere? Cleanse the channels with the 9-round breathing. So what are the channels? The wind itself doesn't just go everywhere within the body. It goes through certain channels, or nadis. Nadi is a Sanskrit word that means channel. What do they call it in acupuncture? What are they called?
Meridian.
The meridians, maybe? And what is it? What is the energy that flows through the meridians called, Anna, in Chinese? Isn't it qi? Something like qi. It's a qi, prana, lung, wind energy, or energy currents, all talking about the same thing. So there are certain channels within our body. Some of the winds that flow within it are just related to physical processes, but some of the winds, or prana, are associated, are the mounts of consciousness. So what we want to do is get rid of the winds that are perpetuating the thoughts that might be antithetical, non-conducive, hindering our concentration. We want to get rid of the defiled winds so that those minds will not rise easily in concentration. So what we do is we begin, you can put your, there's simple ways and more complicated ways. You can put your thumb on the base of one of the fingers there, make a fist, and you raise, what is this finger called? Is this the index? Is index finger, right? You close like this. Don't push your head over. Just close your nostril, which is that's my left nostril. Fingertip. You can put your knuckle up there. I think you've got your knuckle up there. That could work also, but like this. And you breathe in the right nostril, imagining that as you breathe in, it goes up the nostril, up to, there's a channel, a nadi, that goes from there up to the top of your head, down what's called the central channel, down the side of the central channel. And imagine it ends at the heart, although it continues on down. Imagine it goes there, that you breathe in air. You're breathing in virtuous energy of all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Like tapping into that. You hold that at your heart chakra for some time. So this is not just an ordinary breathing meditation. You move your finger to the other nostril. And you breathe out through your left nostril now. You breathe in from the right, having closed the left. Now you're closing the right, you breathe out from the left. Black smoke. Imagine that that white energy that you've breathed in fills your body as you're holding it, and it burns up all of the defiled winds of your body, which you imagine is black. They become incapable of being mounts of the distracting minds, anger, attachment, jealousy, whatever, fantasy. And you breathe them out in the form of black soot out your left nostril. Going out, if you can elongate that, imagine it goes beyond Washington, D.C., beyond America, ends in China. No, I'm just joking. Had some political interest. So breathe out, goes beyond the earth, the solar system, nothing to do with you any longer. Okay, so where's your finger now? Started here on your left nostril, you breathe in, breathe out the left. Now breathe in the left nostril. It's, again, white light filling the body. That white light, I'm trying to talk and hold my breath at the same time. That white light burns up the defiled winds of your body. And there's a way of defining the slightly different winds that are burned up between the breathing the right and left nostril. Right now it just burns up the negative energy. Yeah. You might hold for as long as you can, and then imagine all that energy has entered into the right nadi, sort of there, and you breathe it out. Nothing to do with you any longer. Okay? Then you place your hands on your lap, and you breathe in through both nostrils. Third round. Goes up to the crown, down to the heart chakra. They both meet at the heart chakra and enter into the central channel. After holding the breath for some time and you imagine breathing out, you imagine that rather than expelling those breaths, although they do come out your nostrils, imagine that all of the airs enter into the central channel. That's 3 rounds, right? 1, 2, 3. You do that 3 times. Now, anyone who's been to school knows 3 times 3 is 9. So that's why it's called the 9-round meditation. At the end of that, depending on your skill and your visualization and your faith that you're actually expelling these, you can be left in a very clear state of mind, which is you're ready to practice the Mahamudra meditation. Within that clear state of mind, that's when you enter into the basic practice of taking refuge and generating bodhicitta. Many different prayers, different manuals. You know, we've gone over that before. Jamie, you know how to take refuge, what the prayers that Venerable taught? Generating bodhicitta, do you know what that means? Generating this particular state of mind. So they are preludes to the Mahamudra meditation. So in Alex's translation, in the middle of that middle paragraph, having thoroughly separated out muddied states of awareness from lucid ones, so expelling the defiled winds from the channels within which they were embedded, then with a purely constructive mind, direct toward your root guru, your taking of safe direction and reaffirmation of your bodhicitta aim. So it just means take refuge and generate bodhicitta, thinking of your guru. Meditate next on a profound path of guru yoga, and after making hundreds of very strong fervent requests, dissolved your visualized guru into yourself. So basically what it means, after having done the 9-round breathing, you've eliminated these defiled states to some degree, so your mind is lucid and clear. Then to thinking of your guru, to take refuge and generate bodhicitta, imagine them coming to the crown of your head, a little duplicate of your guru, visualized, and recite a request to them hundreds of times. Say they recite their heart, what they call their roots, their name mantra. Have you ever heard, like, what was the, if your guru was Lama Tsongkhapa, what would the mantra be? Do you know, Venerable, Lama Tsongkhapa's name mantra? Was it something like, I may be leaving out some of those, Om A Guru Vajradhara, so identifying him as enlightened tantric aspect of the Buddha, Vajradhara. Om A Guru Vajradharma Sumati Kirti Siddhi Hum. Sumati Kirti was the Sanskrit name of Lama Tsongkhapa. Sumati, Sanskrit word, the Tibetan equivalent of that is Losang. Very common Tibetan name, right? Kirti, like Dharma Kirti, so forth. Kirti means renowned. Drakpa in Tibetan. So Losang Drakpa is Lama Tsongkhapa's ordination name, right? Losang Drakpa. Did you know that? So in Sanskrit, the equivalent of Losang Drakpa is Sumati Kirti. So you'd say, Om A Guru Vajradhara Sumati Kirti Siddhi Hum. Sort of like requesting realization. So you would recite that name mantra of your guru. Like when Lama Yeshe gave us his name mantra, at one occasion when he had taught the Tara Chittamani, because there's a point in there when you recite your guru's name mantra, he didn't give us just his name mantra, he embedded it within his guru's name mantra. His guru was Trijang Rinpoche, so there's more syllables of the names, including Lama's name within there. So he was very humbly saying, you know, I'm kind of feel like I'm a heart disciple of Trijang Rinpoche. So when you say his name and my name is embedded in there, it's sort of like you get some benefit. Even my name is not worth anything. He was saying very humbly. So I think something like Oma Guru Vajradhara Sumati Muni Jnana Shasana Dara Sumadra Siddhi Hum. So many, you know, these great lamas sometimes have many names. Even today, there's some people like Prince Charles. Do you know the English Prince Charles, who might become king if the Queen Elizabeth ever gives up her throne before he dies? He has many names, right? Have you ever heard some of them? I can't remember any. Anyone know? Do you know, Jeff or Eric or anyone? Venerable, do you know? No Anglophiles here? James, Charles, Edward, blah, 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 blah. So also the Dalai Lama, in longer version, has many epithets, many names, if you say the name mantra of the Dalai Lama. So one would say the name mantra of one's root guru, imagining on the top, nectar coming down. Already your mind is lucid to a certain degree because you've expelled the defiled winds. Now you develop some inspiration, some special blessing from your guru, who is an emanation of the Buddha. You might say it 108 times, a whole mala. And then, in that inspired state, imagine that the guru descends through the aperture at the top of your head. It's called the aperture of Brahma. When you do transference of consciousness, that's where you imagine the consciousness leaving. When you do poa, you know that, right? You've heard that before. So you imagine the guru goes down, enters into the crown chakra, which is sort of in the central channel around here, back there. And then blessing that goes down to your throat chakra, blessing your speech, goes down to the heart chakra, and as though seated in your heart chakra, where your subtlemost mind is, you imagine your mind merging with this incredibly blissful state you're experiencing, like unifying again with the Guru. Lama Yeshe coming home, just feeling totally safe, everything's okay, letting your mind merge with that. And from within that state, you begin the Mahamudra meditation. Okay? Bula translates that as, meditate on the profound path of Guru Yoga, and after making hundreds of fervent requests and so on, dissolve the Guru into yourself. You could, besides the name mantra, you could have other, like when we do Lama Chopa Puja, Guru Puja, there's a fervent request we say. You are the Guru, you are the, what is it? Kyoni Lama, Kyoni Yidam, Kyoni Kandru Chokyonte. You are the Guru, you are the Kyoni Lama Guru, Kyoni Yidam. You are the Yidam, the meditation deity. You are the Dakas and Dakinis also. In the future, I will seek no refuge other than you. In this and in the future lives, even in the intermediate state, please hold me with the hooks of your great compassion. Free me from the fears of samsara and nirvana. Is nirvana something fearful? Think about that. Free me from the fears of samsara and nirvana. Be my constant companion and aid, and eliminate all of the obstacles. You could say that kind of prayer that's in Lama Chopa also. That could be a fervent request rather than saying the name mantra. You could say both. So we're going to leave there. It's just 12:33. So we sort of end for a little bit for lunch break. We'll be back at, 2:04. Close enough. A couple of minutes after 2. And we will continue in the text to see if we can actually finish this. Should be okay. And we'll do some more meditation. We'll try to do the 9-round meditation. So when you do this, the Mahamudra meditation, that's very useful. Whatever you do, whatever meditation you do in the morning, if you do the 9-round meditation, become skillful in that. At a certain point, you can do it in an abbreviated way. Still 9. You breathe in like this. Instead of one long breath in, you go. 3 in. Gross out. Subtle out. Most subtle out. 3 out. Then three levels of letting out gross, subtlest, and then 3 inhalations, and then within the central channel. That's still 9 rounds, but once you become skillful, you don't have to go in so much, elaboration there. Okay, so let's take a break. See you back at just after 2.